Welcome to our first Learning Community of the Year. This is from the Minnesota Inclusive Higher Education Consortium, and we're really thrilled to have the guests we have today. Please take care of yourself as we go through this time. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from Russ and Alyssa and having some dialogue. There's a couple things we'd like to get started with today. And the first is just our land acknowledgement. So we want to acknowledge that the University of Minnesota, the ICI, which MyHEC is housed through, stands on the rightful grounds of the Dakota Nations and several other indigenous groups. We recognize that the U.S. did not uphold its land treaties, and we are currently here because of the continued displacement of the Dakota community and other indigenous groups, and they graciously allow us to exist here today. The next is our affirmation of commitment. At the Institute of Community Integration, we affirm our commitment to address systemic racism, ableism, and all other forms of inequities that contribute to making sure that we can have inclusive communities. The funding statement. Funding for today's learning community event has been provided by a state appropriation through the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. We are thrilled to have Russ Thielen with us here today. Russ is a senior policy fellow at the Institute of Community Institution out of Boston. He works for Think College. He's been a strong ally and a strong advocate in the voc rehabilitation area all around the country. He specializes in vocational rehabilitation counseling, organizational change, business engagement, and inclusive post-secondary education. We also have Alyssa Klein here with us today. Alyssa comes to us with 28 years of experience with the voc rehabilitation services. She started out her career as a guidance counselor for youth and adults with disabilities. In her current statewide role, she focuses on interagency initiatives and training to support youth with disabilities in post-secondary education, independent living, and employment. And with that, we are very excited to hand it over to Russ today.
Okay, find myself getting myself unmuted here, and I'm going to share my screen with you all. It's great to be here with you today. I see a few friends in the mix here. Denise Roselle, I see that you're here today. Please don't tell on me anything I say wrong, okay? So it's always great to see my friend Denise in the mix here today. So we're going, between Alyssa and I, we're going to spend a little bit of time, each of us covering a little bit different aspects of the same topic when it comes to vocational rehabilitation and inclusive post-secondary education. I'm going to be coming at this from a little bit more of the national perspective, and with my background in vocational rehabilitation and my work with Think College at the other ICI, the Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And then I think Alyssa's going to talk a little bit more specifically about Minnesota. So you look at this particular slide here, and the title of what I want to share with you today is, what is vocational rehabilitation really? And so we're going to try to talk about things in maybe a little bit different light than what you may have heard or may have experienced as you work with vocational rehabilitation. Thank you, Katie, for the really nice introduction of both Alyssa and I. As was mentioned, I am a senior policy fellow at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and the Institute for Community Inclusion there. To maybe just give a little more depth to that introduction that was made by Katie of me, and then I'll let Alyssa add a couple of comments here. Just so you know, my background, I'm 34 years, going on 35 years in vocational rehabilitation. I've worked in every role from rehabilitation counselor to every different position within an agency that you could imagine, up to and including an executive director of a vocational rehabilitation agency. For a number of years, I was the executive director of the Utah State Office of Rehabilitation, which is where I'm coming to you from. I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, or at least the suburbs of Salt Lake City. So I've got a very broad background in vocational rehabilitation. I started as a counselor, but I've done everything from written policy to manage the facilities of our offices to writing the state plan, and strategic partnerships with other entities. So I feel like I've got a fairly good background in VR, and I love vocational rehabilitation. I tell people all the time, I'm a proud vocational rehabilitation professional. Now, in saying that, I know we're not perfect, and I know we got some things to work on, but I'm really proud of being a part of this profession. And I hope that you get a sense of why when we talk a little bit more about what vocational rehabilitation is really. So I'm going to pause there. Alyssa, what would you add?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Russ. Again, Alyssa Klein, and I'm here in Minnesota. And I too have been in the VR system for many years, about 28 years, here in Minnesota, vocational rehabilitation. I worked for 10 years as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. So I worked directly with people who have disabilities. I worked with high school students and adults in the Anoka County area during that time. And what really propelled me into the position I have now, which I've held roughly 18 years, was seeing things in our system not always working the way I wanted to see them work. And at the time, and particularly working with high school students and young adults, not getting enough opportunities to explore careers and get the support they need to prepare for careers. And that's a big part of what we're talking about tonight, in having the opportunities for all young people, for all people, to have training opportunities and how our system can help support those opportunities. So it's exciting to be where we're at. I've seen so many changes over the years. So during my part of the presentation, I want to talk a little bit about how we operate here in Minnesota, how you can get connected to our services. And I know we'll have some time for questions and dialogue, which is to me the best part of the presentation. I also want to say in my background here, is information or kind of marketing for a National Disability Employment Awareness Month. We're celebrating that here in October. And in the chat, I have a link here to the Career Force site here in Minnesota, where you can get more information about that. So you can, if you can't see the chat, you can Google Career Force Minnesota National Disability Employment Awareness Month. That's a mouthful. But you can also get a background like me if you wanted to get that on your screen. So look forward to talking with you more in a little bit, and I'll hand it back to Russ.
All right, thanks, Alyssa. And Alyssa and I have known each other for a lot of years, and so what a privilege it is to do this presentation together. So, wanting to get through our presentation so we can get to that discussion and question and answers, I'm going to try to move through my slides pretty quickly here. And I want to really do this through the lens of those of you who are attending, specifically as you are involved in, interested in, advocates for, stakeholders for inclusive post-secondary education. So as we talk about this, I really want to try to do it through this lens. I'm going to try to make some comments as we go through this, but jot your questions down and we'll talk about them when we get to the end. Let's start at the beginning. Since the inception of the public vocational rehabilitation program in 1920, we've been through a host of different legislative reauthorizations. There have been a variety of different amendments that have changed the program, and in some of the ways that we've operated for over 100 years. Now, while we've been through those different reauthorizations, while those amendments have occurred, yes, there have been some procedural or policy or other types of objectives that have gone through some metamorphosis. They have changed a bit, and they have gone through a little bit of a bringing things current with the times. But I really want to emphasize here today that the objective of the vocational rehabilitation program has not changed. We are still about helping individuals with disability. And in the audience we're talking about today, those with intellectual disabilities, to find meaningful employment outcomes. We are a program that is about helping people get to employment, to get to vocational results. And so I want to make sure that we're talking about that constancy, and I want to highlight a few of those as we go through the presentation today. Let's talk number one, and this is actually a quote from the Rehabilitation Act and the regulations that tell us how we operate as a program that is legislated by Congress. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973, as amended, I don't have that in there, but this is the most amended language, seeks to empower individuals with disabilities to maximize employment, economic self-sufficiency, independence, and inclusion and integration into society. Now, I want to take just a minute and pause on this. That reference there is the 34 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 361. That's where this comes from. Now, not that you need to know that, but I think this is something that you want to make sure that you are aware of, because when we talk about vocational rehabilitation, once in a while, there will be this idea that vocational rehabilitation is a jobs program, that we're a program that helps people to get a job. Well, employment is a driving factor of why vocational rehabilitation exists. But I want, and this will become apparent in terms of the importance for inclusive post-secondary education, by my saying it is not a jobs program. We are not about connecting with the marketplace solely and taking individuals looking for a job and people who need a job and connecting them with the job that's out there in the community. We are much broader than that. Our purpose is much more refined than that. We are about helping people find their passion, find their connection to society, find the place where they want to fit, where they can add to society and gain support from society in a way that fulfills them and also fulfills society. That's more than a jobs program. And that's why I like to highlight this slide that you have here. We are about maximizing employment opportunities, not just getting someone a job, but finding the right job in the right career path to maximize and to help them realize their potentials and have them give back and contribute to society in the way that they want to, not just to take that first job that comes available. It's about integration. It's about having choice. It's about having independence, being included in the way that everyone else is included. And I think that's an important part that I want to make sure you understand about why vocational rehabilitation exists in the way that it does, but that gets lost sometimes. So let's talk just a little bit about, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, I can tell on my slide already. I get excited about this stuff. When we talk about this purpose and maximize employment, economic self-sufficiency, we are not, as I just said, a legislative jobs program. I think of us more as a social justice program for people with disabilities. Rehabilitation isn't necessarily about rehabilitating the person with the disability. Yes, we may have some assistive technology, or there may be some counseling needs, or there may be some remediatory aspects that help a person to work their way to manage or otherwise become comfortable with having a disability, if that be the case. But the effort of rehabilitation is really about rehabilitating society so that that individual can maximize, have their opportunities, realize the potential that they have. And so we're not about fixing people. We're about fixing society. And in the process, we may help a person through some things that they need to have or want to have to help them be able to integrate into that society fully. So again, we are so much more than a jobs program. When we talk about rehabilitation, we talk about it from a transactional as well as a transformational perspective. Within the program and the way the program is written, there are some transactions. You do need to apply for the program. We do need to determine if you meet the federally established criteria to know if you are eligible. So there is some give and take. There are transactional aspects to what we do. And I've listed some of those that are kind of major here. The application is a transaction. I'm going to give you an application and you're going to do something with it. That is eligibility. We're going to determine eligibility and tell you you're eligible. And then you're going to do something by working with us to develop an individualized plan for employment, or an IPE. And we're going to draft that together with what we both agree are those things that we're going to transact with you to help you get to an employment outcome, to get to that place of contributing to, fitting into society, being in the place you want to be in our society, to maximize your ability and to give back and to receive the support you need. And then we're going to provide those services, all very transactional. And those transactions are very, very important. But there is something more significant than that. One level above these transactions, which is the give and take, it's kind of like the going through the checkout line at your favorite store. Above that is what I call transformational. And I realize I didn't change that in my upper right-hand corner. That should say transformational, not transactional. Wouldn't you know it? I don't see that until it's in front of you. But when we talk about transformations, I talk here about client transformations, but again, I really should include client or participant, individual, and societal transformations, because our client is also society. There is professional work that is being done between these transactions that are really the major changers of society on one hand, of the individual on the other, to help both put themselves into the greatest position for that individual to engage in and contribute to society, and have society receive them in the way that they want to be received to realize their full potential. And I want to talk about it in that way because what happens from time to time is we get into situations, especially not just with inclusive post-secondary education, but it happens a lot, where you get into a situation where you apply for services and you say, I want to go to an inclusive program at XYZ University. And the VR agency says, oh, we don't do that. Well, that's not vocational rehabilitation program, the way it's established by law, the way I'm trying to portray it to you, and you need to be aware of that. If there's a message that I want you to leave with today, it's that the way that sometimes vocational rehabilitation can present itself is often as a jobs program, because we can drift that way and we can let ourselves think that way, but that is not who we are. And it is totally okay for you to see it as what it is and advocate for it to serve in the way that it is intended to be. So thank you for the couple of hearts there that I saw, that I shared that, because I think that's a significant part of what I want to share today about what vocational rehabilitation really is. And in order to really reach that, there's a few things that I think are key elements in working with vocational rehabilitation. One of them is communicate to build a partnership. If we can work to build partnerships and not necessarily come in with our arrow in the bow, ready to fire, but maybe just have it in the quiver until we need it, but try to work with vocational rehabilitation, share what we understand VR to be, to build partnerships around what you mutually want to have. I think that is an important part. We really should start by working to build partnerships. VR should be doing that, your counselor, and you or the person for whom you're advocating, or you as an individual with disabilities, Work to build that partnership. Recognize that counseling and guidance is an integral part of the vocational rehabilitation program. If we're just a jobs program, then all we really are is we're a placement agency. But we're not. We have counselors to help individuals, to help society, to help advocates, to help whoever is a resource, to help that individual get to their maximum potential, and giving guidance to help them navigate and help them change the conditions for that potential to be realized. It's also important to recognize that any service that a VR agency provides, whether it's a paid service or not, does need to be in that individualized plan for employment, or IPE. That's a federal requirement. We need to have in plan those services that we are providing because we report on those. The federal government wants to know what it is we're doing to help individuals to get to those potentials. And it is beyond just paid services. So with that, it's not unusual, and I know that it happens a fair amount in working with VR agencies and inclusive post-secondary ed. I'm here to tell you vocational rehabilitation in Minnesota does a pretty good job of this. In fact, I think they do a very good job of this. There may be some patches, there may be some spots where these are an issue, and I want to share some information with you around that. But I want you to realize that there are a lot of agencies and a lot of VR programs in states that aren't nearly as good. If you have an unwanted or an undesired decision by VR, it is not the final decision. There is always a way for those to be reviewed. You have due process. It is an entitlement under the Rehabilitation Act. The VR agency must provide a mechanism and a process for any decision that an individual with disability or their advocate disagrees with. And I want to highlight that because you don't have to take VR's answer, we don't do that, and just say, oh, well, they're not going to do it. You have that right to change and challenge that. Number one, always start by working with your counselor. It's okay to educate them, share with them. I understand that it is within the scope of vocational rehabilitation to support programs like this. Now, it's always mutually agreed to. A counselor certainly can have some concerns, and you need to discuss those. The individual with disability or their advocate needs to work with that counselor to navigate to agreeing to support an inclusive program or any other service that's provided. But if at the end of the day they say no and you think that that's not the right answer, work with them, help them, educate them. If that doesn't work, let them know, I don't agree with you. Thank you for your time. Again, try your best to be working in a partnership, but say, I want to have a supervisor review this. Your next step, and you don't have to follow this particular order, but I think it's a nice order to follow. Ask for a supervisory review. I'd like to talk with your supervisor and I'd like them to review the information. If that supervisory review comes back and upholds that position you don't agree with, you don't have to end there. You can seek an administrative review. You can ask the agency's leadership to review that. You always have access to a client assistance program. That's a federally required program, and Minnesota has a program. Money is allocated for that, and it is an advocacy program for individuals to get specific assistance for due process, and it is at no cost to the individual with a disability. At the end of the day, one of the final arbitrations on this can be an impartial hearing or a fair hearing in front of an impartial hearing officer. Now, you don't have to go through this step. I'm giving it to you in a way that makes sense to me, but it can be, you can jump right to the fair hearing and say, you know what, you've given me that decision. I want an impartial hearing officer to look at this. You have that right. You can go directly to CAP CAP can assist you in that impartial hearing. Please be aware that if things aren't decided in the way that you think are in the best interest for yourself or for another individual, there are always options for you to have that reviewed up to and including an impartial hearing officer. Now, I'm taking a lot of time, so I'm going to cover these last few slides really, really quick, because I think, Mary, I'm guessing you and Katie will share these slides with others, and they'll be able to go back to these. My next slides here are just a series of resources that can help you in working with vocational rehabilitation, specifically to inclusive post-secondary education. The first one comes from another part of the federal regulations, which I alluded to earlier. This comes from the comments section of the federal regulations, where the regulations are put out in draft form. People can ask questions, ask for clarification, and basically just say, we want this, we want you to consider this for the final draft of the regulations. This comes from that comment section. And this comes from that same 34th CFR 361 at section 48, subsection B. And this was the question that was asked. Commenters to this draft regulation suggested that this section allow designated state units, that's the VR agency, that they allow agencies to provide tuition and other services for students with intellectual or developmental disabilities in a comprehensive transition or a post-secondary program. These inclusive post-secondary programs. People are saying, we want the regulations to allow for agents, VR, to fund these schooling programs, inclusive post-secondary education. Well, here was the Fed's response to that. Similarly, here we clarify that vocational and other training services specified in that subsection does in fact encompass tuition and other services for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities in comprehensive transition and post-secondary programs for students with intellectual disabilities. So here you go. If you need some backup, and I can see Denise smiling as I'm sharing this, if you're wondering, can VR fund this? If VR is saying, no, we don't do that. Here's the federal regulations in the comments, and RSA, the federal oversight of the VR program being run across the country, saying VR can do it. It's right there in the regulations. VR can fund that. The next one is a transition guide to post-secondary education and employment for students and youth with disabilities. This is an actual guidance document from the Rehabilitation Services Administration, the federal agency that oversees the VR program nationally. I've given you, there's a link here to this actual guidance document, and this is a quote from it. The VR program assists individuals with disabilities, including students and youth with disabilities, to acquire the knowledge and skills to achieve employment that can sustain economic independence. And that language includes, if it is deemed necessary, VR agencies can provide financial support to eligible individuals to pay for or offset higher education-related expenses, including college expenses not covered by student financial aid or disability-related expenses. So even RSA, outside of the regulations, RSA in their own guidance document says that if it's determined necessary for a person to get to that potential that they want to reach, VR can provide education expenses, and including those that are maybe not covered by student financial aid. And if they have disability-related expenses that come up in order for them to participate in that higher education, those expenses can also be covered by VR. And TPSs, by the way, TPSs are specifically mentioned there. And TPSs are those transition post-secondary education in programs that are funded by RSA money around the country. Here's a document not from RSA, but from the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services and the Office of the Post-Secondary Education in 2019. Look at this quote. Yes, VR funds can be used to support students with disabilities in CTPs. That's a comprehensive transition program, if certain conditions are met. Students, youth, and their families, with the assistance of VR program as appropriate, should consider the wide array of post-secondary options that are available, including but not limited to 2- and 4-year colleges, universities, career and technical schools, and adult education programs, and it goes on. Again, here we have federal guidance from the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services and Post-Secondary Education saying VR funds can be used for post-secondary education, including post-secondary education for individuals with intellectual disabilities. Then this goes on again. This is continuing. A comprehensive transition and post-secondary education program is an example of one post-secondary option for which VR programs could provide assistance to students and youth with intellectual disabilities when appropriate and agreed to on their approved individualized plan for employment. Again, it's something that's agreed to with the counselor, but if it's helping that person meet their potential, there is nothing that says that the program cannot fund those programs. So hopefully this is helpful to you. I feel like I'm feeding you a little bit with a fire hose, but that's why I have my next couple of slides here. Couple of resources. You've got the Think College homepage where you can go. It's a great website, a lot of resources. There is a place where you can go within Think College, and I've given you the link here that gives you a bunch of VR-specific resources to help you navigate any challenges you're facing with VR or just learning about vocational rehabilitation and inclusive post-secondary education. And last but not least is my contact information. I work for Think College. I do technical assistance with programs, both VR and at the college inclusive programs. I'm happy to be contacted and reached out to. So I'm the place where you can come if you can't find it anywhere else, or if you're having issues. I'm not going to step in and be an advocate, but I will be a technical assistant. My role is not to advocate directly on individual cases, but I can educate, I can inform programs such as VR, inclusive post-secondary ed, or other entities that helps see what vocational rehabilitation really is. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn the time over to Alyssa. Hopefully that helps, and if you've got questions, let's tackle them here in a little bit. Alyssa, hand it off to you.
All right. Thank you, Russ, for giving us that broader perspective of vocational rehabilitation and supporting programming such as inclusive higher education. I am very proud to tell all of you that our leadership on down here in Minnesota, Vocational Rehabilitation Services absolutely supports inclusive higher education. One of my duties in my statewide role is to help provide guidance to our staff and assistance to them in supporting people who are in inclusive higher education. So really happy to say that. So what I want to do today is just to give you a little bit more information in case you're not as familiar with Minnesota's vocational rehabilitation program, so that you can connect with us. And I am also a resource if you need help with connecting with our program, and I'll have my contact information as well. So why don't we just go into a little bit about who we are. So as Russ explained, vocational rehabilitation is a federal program, but it's operated within each of the states in the country. So we are the Minnesota Vocational Rehabilitation Program that provides employment services and more for people who have disabilities. We're under the Department of Employment and Economic Development, otherwise known as DEED. So DEED administers lots of different employment and economic development programs. One of those is called Career Force. Career Force is the branding for services available to anybody, whether you have a disability or not. to get help with finding jobs, getting connected to employment programs. We have career force locations across the state. There's 50 of them. And we also have a website. And I had actually put in the chat earlier a page from Career Force on National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So I definitely recommend, if you're looking for any sort of resource related to employment, to look there. We also support businesses. So as Russ said, our program is about helping people who have disabilities as well as society, which includes employers. So we're here to help support employers in hiring people with disabilities. And also note that we have a sister agency called State Services for the Blind, or SSB. They provide the same sort of services that we do, and they are more targeted for people who are blind, low vision, or who are deaf blind. So just keep that in mind. If you or somebody you know has a vision impairment, they could be served by State Services for the Blind, but then our agency, VRS, serves any other type of disability. So know that the last bullet on here is that our program serves youth and adults. So we can serve youth as early as age 14, that's typically 9th grade, on up with employment services. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that we're able to provide to high school students in particular in a little bit. Go here. So these are kind of the big buckets of services that we provide. And Russ talked about the first one, or many of these earlier, but at the heart of everything we do is counseling and guidance. So we have counselors and other staff that work one-on-one with a person and anyone else they want at the table with them, an advocate, a family member, whoever it might be that helps support them, but to get to know them and understand their hopes and dreams, and help them with a plan to get there with those dreams that you have. As Russ mentioned, we create a plan. I put it in the chat, that IPE he mentioned, we call it the employment plan here in Minnesota, but we help everyone create a plan. And in that plan, it's noting what a person's job goal is and all the services that they want or need to get toward that goal. And so that those services can include job training, which can include inclusive higher education programming at a higher institution program. It can include helping somebody with finding a job, helping somebody with keeping a job and any supports they might need there. And then what we provide to students, particularly those in high school, but you can be in post-secondary education as well, are a set of services called pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETS. So my next slide will get into that, but these are just kind of big buckets of services. There's much more that we could provide, but it's all individualized based on what a person needs in order to reach those employment goals that they have. So pre-employment transition services are available to any high school student with a disability across the whole state. And these are, pre-ETS services are 5 particular services, and I'll just go through them real briefly. The first is job exploration counseling. So helping young people learn about careers, learn about themselves, and kind of start dreaming and looking at, what kind of things might I want to do in terms of a career, and being able to explore all the options. And it might even mean getting out there and seeing jobs and trying jobs, which brings us to our next bullet on here, which is work-based learning experiences. So I think that's one of the most important things that we can provide, is opportunity. It could be, again, to get out there and get into a business environment. So it could be a tour. It could be trying a job, like a short-term work experience, or it could be getting a job while you're in school. The third area, which really relates to what we're talking about today, is post-secondary education counseling. It's important for us to support that vision that we would like to see everybody consider what kind of post-secondary education or training they could participate in and after high school. So looking at all the different options, and if you're looking at inclusive higher education, what kind of options are out there for you? Workplace readiness training can include a lot of different things, but anything that's going to help a person be successful on a job. So it could be, or even preparing for a job. So it could be practicing interviewing, practicing applications, creating a resume. It could be things related to independent living skills. So maybe learning how to access transportation or learning how to budget money, things like that. And then finally, but certainly not least, is instruction and self-advocacy. So we really want to help people who have disabilities, young people, learn about themselves and be able to speak up for what they want and need and how to do that. So those are the pre-ET services that are, again, available to every high school student with a disability across the state. So how do you access our program? So in terms of high school students, we have 2 staff assigned to every high school and 18 to 22 transition program across the state. These staff are called VR counselors and pre-ETS representatives. So what we have linked on this page, so it's on our website, is a directory of all the schools across the state. And then you can find your school and find the staff that are assigned. So you'll see typically 2 staff assigned. You can reach out to either of those staff, and sometimes there's more staff even, but you can reach out to any of them and say, I'm interested in services, and they will help connect you and explain our services more, how to apply. They'll meet you and a family member, when and where is most convenient. If you have any trouble with figuring out how to apply to our program, here's the first place I have my email address. So you can always reach out to me, Alyssa Klein, and my email is on this slide. And then for people who are not in high school, either graduated or just not in school, you can access the nearest vocational rehabilitation services office to where you live. There's a link on here where you can figure out, we have actually it's an information form where you can put in your information and someone will get back to you and help you get connected. I just wanted to note is that we're making a big transition in December where we're going to have a centralized intake unit. So everyone will be able to go, one phone number, one place. We're calling it the virtual intake unit for everybody that's new to applying to VRS. And then there'll be more information about that coming. But at this point, there's a link here and you can put your information in and someone will get back to you. When we have this virtual intake unit, they will set up, they'll work with a person on applying for services virtually. And there'll be ways that you can still go to an office nearby and get connected that way too. So anyway, more information is coming. It'll be on our website, but just wanted to let you know that there'll be that change coming in December. So I was real brief on just giving you a little bit of information about our program. Again, we're going to have some more time here to answer questions more specifically that you might have. And I have our website on here where you also can get more information. And certainly I welcome any emails about our program after tonight as well. So with that, I'll hand it back to the MyHEC team.
Look and see if there are any questions or.
Yeah, there is one question in the chat.
Yes. I can
so
answer that
Can
question.
you, that'd be great. Thanks, Alyssa.
Okay, Marissa says, hi, how is the determination on disability made? Is it students with an IEP or 504 or a medical diagnosis? Actually, all of the above, or any or all of the above. I mentioned those pre-employment transition services. Basically, if a person is in school between the ages of 14 to 22, they can receive those pre-employment transition services. We just need to verify that a student has a 504 plan, has an IEP, or has a medical diagnosis. So our staff will talk about how we can get that. Oftentimes it's getting it from a school staff person that says, yep, the student has an IEP. And we get release of information to be able to share information with the school staff. But yeah, it's a pretty easy process to gain access to pre-employment transition services. And then we have a full scope of services where we usually that's when a student gets to be more their junior, senior year and beyond, where we get a little more information about the student, maybe get a copy of their IEP or medical information. It helps us to provide more comprehensive services. So anyway, our staff will walk up you or your child through all of that, and help make the process as easy as possible.
Alyssa, it looks like another question popped in, but I also see that Molly has her hand up. So maybe we'll go to Molly first, if that's okay.
And actually, Russ, before we continue with questions, if we could have people take a minute to complete the poll, we'd very much appreciate feedback, and then we'll have time for questions.
I'm not sure if I finished the questionnaire so that I'm like, can I ask a question or will you give me the go ahead, Mary?
Go for it, Molly.
Okay. So I have a lot of questions. And I'm gonna fumble through them because I'm not exactly sure how to ask them. So in the state of Minnesota, so I am the director of inclusive post-secondary program at NDSU in North Dakota. And so we have a lot of students. My background is all in Minnesota. And so I know mostly the background of Minnesota, where I taught in Moorhead for 23 years. My question is, within the state of Minnesota, we are seeing people from different parts of Minnesota getting substantially different amounts. And so one person from one region of Minnesota is getting well over half their tuition paid, and another student maybe is getting like $1,000. And so for me, the question is, how is there a formula that you use to decide what can be given to students?
Yes, well, a couple things, Molly. This is Alyssa. Number one, I feel like maybe you and I should connect a little bit because I want to help make sure, I think we could, with your program being right next door, and I am aware that we have a number of participants that we serve that are attending the TAP program. It'd be nice to have a liaison to your program and make sure things are, these sort of questions can be answered and can be organized well. So I'll just say that. We do have policy and guidance related to how we support post-secondary education. So typically there's a few things that we look at. Number one, we typically look at family income. We're excited right now that we have a moratorium. Basically, we have a break on looking at family income to look at how much we're able to pay for things like post-secondary education. So that's number one. Number two, if financial aid is available, which I can't recall, is there federal financial aid? Okay, so we typically, for any program that does have federal financial aid available, we require a person to complete the FAFSA form in the federal financial aid application form. And so we look to see what somebody qualifies with that. And then we do have what's called a fee schedule for what we're able to pay for in terms of post-secondary education. So there is guidance on that. If I was a little more prepared, we do have a policy page in our on our website where we have kind of our thresholds of what we can pay. But if somebody is in state in a public program in Minnesota, so there's actually two inclusive higher education programs in Minnesota that are public. They are called the Occupational Skills Programs at Central Lake College in Brainerd and the Ridgewater Occupational Skills Program in Wilmer. So we are able to fund fully for those programs after looking at financial aid that a person qualifies for. You also need to be, of course, enrolled in our program and have that program as a part of your employment plan. With an out-of-state school, we do have a limit on how much we're able to pay for out-of-state. I wonder if part of it was related to how many credits a person was taking. We look at whether they're going full-time or part-time. But getting into some of those details, Molly, maybe you and I can connect outside of this and have more
Yeah,
conversations.
absolutely.
Some of
And
those.
that's
I'm sorry, I'll just interject, Alyssa, we can, you share the link, then we can include that in our follow-up email.
Yeah, as we're talking here, I will, in terms of our policy and where you can find more information, I can get that. Yes.
Thank you.
And that kind of led into my other one where you had spoke specifically about like in-state. So Minnesota VR will first support in-state post-secondary programs before out-of-state. Did I hear that accurately or? So
a person has a choice of where they're going to attend. But if they are attending an in-state public, post-secondary institution, there's not a cap on how much we're going to be able to pay for an in-state public program. We do have a cap on what we can pay for private schools. So another private school in Minnesota that has an inclusive higher education program is Bethel University. So we have a cap on how much we're able to fund. Or if it's an out-of-state school, then we have a cap on how much. So it's not saying we prefer one over the other. It's just how much we're able to provide for funds.
okay.
And a counselor should be, kind of explaining that to a person and their family.
Mhm.
And
And
so
I feel like I play maybe a little bit of a different role in that because I don't know how much I'm supposed to know from each of the individual families. Like I have releases for all of them, but I wouldn't ever want to say to one family that I just don't know that that's my place. And so kind of more so I'm very happy to hear we could have a liaison so that it is as equal as it can be for many students that come from Minnesota. So let's say, could I ask another question? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm hijacking this, but I only have like two more and then I'll mute myself. So let's say we are very much looking to start one in Minnesota right across the river at a different university that would be a Minnesota school. So does that mean that students who are Minnesota residents would need to first choose that school in Minnesota and not go to SU because it's across state lines? No.
No, a person can choose to go to whichever school they want to go to. Of course, we want to help them pick the right one that's the best fit and all of that. But it comes down to a person's choice. It's just that our funding, in terms of going to, like I said, an out-of-state school versus a public in-state school, it's just our funding is more restricted to out-of-state or private schools.
And so will that be the same as we have one student from South Dakota, we have one student from Wyoming. Is every VR then going to have its own individual rules about out of state? Okay.
Yes.
Yikes.
I know every state has their own policies that they put together. And Russ can probably speak to that a lot better than me.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't mind just chiming in really quickly on this because what Alyssa says about Minnesota obviously is correct for Minnesota. There are states that do prioritize for utilizing in-state schools before out-of-state, but they don't prohibit out-of-state schools. What they do say, however, is if a program, if it's a like program and there's no specific disability related reason for them to need to go out of state, we prefer that you use in-state. But if a person wants to go out of state, they can. What that usually means, along the lines of what Alyssa said for Minnesota, is it usually does have some impact on the funding that is provided to out of state. I'll just give you an example. One state I know of, they will pay up to a certain portion for in-state schools. If they want to go to a similar program out of state, they won't pay as much unless there's some disability related reason that they need to or want to go to that other school, such as smaller classroom sizes, or the campus is more amenable to their disabling condition. And if those are the cases, they'll fund whatever they need to. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, Molly, but just to kind of emphasize what Alyssa's saying, every state's going to have their own unique way of how they support in versus out of state schooling, but they cannot prohibit that. In fact, there's recent guidance from RSA encouraging VR agencies to support out of state programs when it makes sense for those individuals. The other thing, and I think it touches a little bit on one of the questions here, Audrey, what if the student is applying to a school out of their home state? Which VR agency do you work with? Well, RSA has come out on this, and it goes back a few years. You can work with both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. As long as those two VR agencies are coordinating and they're not double paying on something. One VR agency can be providing certain services in the state that they're coming from, but the state that they're going to school in, they can also have an open eligible case. And that agency can be providing other things that the home agency VR isn't doing. So the answer is it can be either or both, as long as there's coordination that takes place.
There's a question about once a person has qualified, like is eligible, let's say in Minnesota, does it transfer to another state? I know here in Minnesota, and I imagine that's every state, you would have to apply for that program in that state. It doesn't automatically transfer, but we can collaborate if you are eligible in 2 states. Or you can make that choice. You're coming into Minnesota from another state, you can apply here. And choose just to work with Minnesota, but you would have to apply and be determined eligible, even if you were eligible in another state. But we do support people attending programs out of state. So you can, you're originally from Minnesota, that's your home state, but you're planning to attend a program out of state, you can stay connected to VRS here in Minnesota. That's your choice.
And Denise Roselle put in the chat the guidance on out-of-state services. So thank you, Denise, for being on the ball and having that at your fingertips.
Thank you, Russ and Denise. So I just want to interject. I know we want to be mindful of people's time. It's just after 7. We're going to stop the recording, but we encourage people to stay and continue more of an informal conversation.